those lectures focus on this idea of resurrection and wonder. All of the deacons agreed with it, except for one. I won't say who, but here I am. But I mean, the whole point is like it's just we're getting a little FaceTime in front of the congregation, and that's great. And it's kind of an exercise and stretching and stuff, and we kind of do it in faith, so that's all good. So Peterson focuses on this idea of resurrection and wonder, and to give us a sense of what that looks like, he takes us through the resurrection accounts that are written in the Bible. He goes through the Gospel of John where he highlights these moments of wonder. When I read through the resurrection passages myself, they come across as a little dry and very matter-of-fact to me. So when Mary discovers the tomb is empty, she runs and tells John and Peter. They rush off to the tomb to see what's going on. And it says when they got there, they saw that the tomb was empty, and then they believed. And so when I read it, I just don't have a lot of imagination, and maybe I'm not getting the context. It doesn't really pop out to me. But in his lecture, Peterson reminds us that there's a lot more going on through all of this. And he talks about how Jesus had already foretold his death. The apostles knew it. And it's still a surprise to them when he's crucified. It seems like they're really caught up in the moment of what's going on. And maybe they forget what Jesus told them. Or maybe they don't understand. But in this moment, they've lost their teacher and they've lost a friend. And now they're wanting to give him a proper burial. I never really noticed this part before, but Peterson points out before they could even bury Jesus, they had to observe the Sabbath. And he says this was a really important time that they had to pause and remember God's work of creation. And he says in doing this, it creates an underlying awareness of the immensity of God at work in the world. And so this kind of sets the tone for when the apostles come to the realization that Jesus has actually risen again. Another thing that Peterson highlights is that when John enters the tomb, he notices that the cloth that was covering Jesus' face was neatly folded and set aside. And he kind of makes this assertion that for John, this is like a moment of realization for him. It would have been the moment that he actually realized that Christ had risen again. And it must have been a really profound moment for him. He's realized that Christ has done the impossible. And it must have given an incredible weight to all that the apostles had been learning from Jesus at that point. So this encounter with wonder that John has in the resurrection story is not unique to him. Peterson has a whole bunch of examples about this in that context. Wonder is something that's meant to bring us into a space of humility and reverence before Christ. When you encounter wonder and mystery in the world, you have to toss aside everything you think you know and be open to possibility. And I think this is a key idea that Peterson is trying to illustrate for all of us. He challenges us to form a resurrection identity that's rooted in the hope and the truth and the wonder of Christ's resurrection. I've never really had a moment quite like this or a wonder encounter like this, but the nearest thing that I experienced to this in my own life is when I encountered God in nature. And for me, it's like anytime I go out skiing and I'm up in the mountains and just kind of in that beautiful nature, there's always a moment of pausing and reflecting. Experiences like that will just kind of take you out of yourself, and it forces you to kind of think about the big picture. And another, when I was thinking about that, I remember there's this C.S. Lewis book I read a long time ago, and I think he kind of makes this, he says that it's weird that we would respond to beauty in nature. There's no biological reason for it. There's no, from an evolutionary standpoint, it doesn't really make sense, but he says it's by design. And that's something that's always been affirming to me. Anytime I experience God in nature, I'm reminded of that. So this resurrection identity, it's something we're supposed to cling to and something that we're supposed to cultivate in our daily living. Because when we encounter wonder, we become receptive to God. Peterson talks about the things that can erode our resurrection identity. He says that the number one danger is our workplace. And I thought this was interesting because I've never thought of the workplace as somewhere where my faith would be attacked, but Peterson shares a sort of warning about how our resurrection identity is eroded in that context. He paints the workplace as a battlefield where the very nature of wonder and mystery are not tolerated. And if you kind of think about it, like if you were a doctor and you have a patient who's ill, you don't want to wonder what's wrong with them. You want to figure out exactly what's going on and make your patient healthy again. So that kind of describes the workplace in general. Like above all else, it's competency and skill that are valued most. And Peterson says that when we put all of our energy and focus into developing these things, and when we place our trust in tools and systems to execute our own strategies in the world, we're moving in a way that takes us away from humility and reverence. That's kind of something that we should experience and wonder, and it should be a part of our daily living. We're in a way pursuing power and control over our environments, and so he highlights this as a real danger of the workspace. And so how do we cultivate a sense of wonder in our lives, or how do we kind of bring truth and hope into that context? PJ's preached about this before, and it's about the importance of keeping the Sabbath, because it kind of sets a rhythm for how we encounter God on Monday or in the workplace. It serves as a way of detaching ourselves from the way that the world does things, and it reminds us to look and to respond to what God is doing in the world and in our lives. Again, it makes us open and receptive to encountering wonder in the places that we go. So, the whole idea of like in the workplace and having our identity eroded by this idea of competency and skill, it was a bit of a health check for me, because I've been in my role for about 7 years now, and I'm definitely at a point where I feel skilled and competent. But if I take a step back and look at my attitudes and the idea of humility has definitely disappeared. I think that happens in the way that I interact with people. And it's definitely in the attitudes and stuff that I kind of carry into work. So that was a bit of a health check for me. But in a nutshell, what I've learned is that wonder creates a reverence for God. We need to be open and receptive to having these kinds of encounters because they keep us